You're listening to TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour with your host, the Director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
The September-October issue of the Barnes Review magazine, TBR magazine, is just phenomenal. It is the thickest issue of TBR that has ever been printed. And the reason for that, TBR magazine is celebrating its 25th year of publication since Willis Carto had the great vision to begin the magazine. And let me just say that this may be one of the greatest issues of the magazine that's ever been published. The magazine has a World War II theme with several articles, excellent articles, on World War II, including 3 articles by yours truly. As is our custom, whenever a new issue of TBR magazine comes out, we have Paul Angel, the executive editor of the Barnes Review, here on the Dixie Heritage Hour. And he and I go through and rehash the issue so that you can know what's coming up in it. And so this month, this issue will be no different. I'm going to guess this is the largest issue of TBR that has ever been printed.
This is a big one. There's 140 pages, but the back 30 pages of it is our 2020 catalog, which is pretty important too, because we do generate some revenue from the books we sell, so that we can continue publishing. But it's 110 pages. I think the Defending Dixie issue was 112 without a catalog. And the biggest issue actually we did was that Holocausts issue, September, October in 2019, which was 132, which was pure information start to finish. So yeah, but this is a big one. This is actually the most number of pages, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I think people are really, really going to like this. It's if you've looked through that PDF I sent you for review, you'll see lots of great stuff on World War II. Maybe nothing earth-shattering for our readers, but for most people, there's stuff in there that they never will have heard of. Lots of good short stories, et cetera, commentaries and editorials and articles from a collection of great authors.
The cover, the picture of Adolf Hitler with one of the youth, was that an actual photograph, or did you kind of put the two of them together?
No, Hitler was shown with a member of the Hitler Youth, probably at some event, decorating these very young men for service of one type or another. Our lead story is about Werewolf, the underground resistance movement during the war and after the war, and almost all of them were drawn from Hitler Youth members. The men were at the front or killed off by this point in time. And so these kids were anywhere from Lord 12 to, 16, I guess. And you'll see photographs throughout the Wikipedia or Google or whatever you search on. And you'll see lots of these guys with very much older men who weren't in Werewolf, but of course, but serving at the front and being decorated. I mean, it was amazing. The Werewolf organization was the kids would go out also with SS members and others, but they were of all particular ages, but almost all drawn from the Hitler Youth because it was just the necessity of the time to use every single piece of manpower that they possibly could to defend. The Russians were coming, and it was they knew what was going to be coming. But looking at some of the stories, of course, we'd never discussed the werewolves before, and it was amazing, really. These kids might 20 or 30 of them, might face off against an invading force of Soviet soldiers, brutal Soviet soldiers, maybe in the thousands, and they would hide in the woods or in the cities and wait till they passed and then just pop out and start attacking, almost knowing that it was suicidal doing it. Extreme acts of bravery by these kids. And of course, even once the Allies came, that was basically their function at that point in time, was to try to defend the homeland. But once the Allies took over and the occupation began, the werewolf operation did not end. They were pretty hard asses, I want to say, in that they would, whoever they thought was a traitor, they might go out and kill them. They assassinated the mayor of Aachen. He had been, his identity had been kept secret up to the point where he became mayor. But anyway, some Jewish guy released it because he didn't think he had been pro-occupation enough, pro-Allied enough. And so his name was released, and the Werewolf got a hold of it, and they sent the gal Ilsa, right? There's a great picture of her, an attractive woman who was actually was a former member of the Hitler Youth for the girls, the Maidens. Do you happen to remember off the top of your head?
So I'm looking at her picture here on page 9.
Yes, she was 23-year-old when she was
volunteer. She was a volunteer in Operation Carnival, it says.
Right, in 1945, March 20th. So it was close to the very end of the war. That was an interesting operation, and probably their most famous, what they would call victory. It made headlines all over the world. And the Aachene's mayor was Franz Oppenhoff. They took the Germans had captured an American B-17 Flying Fortress, right, heavy bomber, and they took off, and I guess they parachuted these guys in there along with Ilsa Hirsch. They ended up going to find the guy's house, and he opened the door, and he said, "Why don't you turn yourselves in?" I think they portrayed themselves as Germans, pilots or airmen who had been shot down. And he said, no, I can't hide you. So they just killed him. But at any rate, they also had some other pretty impressive operations. They killed a Soviet general in Berlin, I believe, during the occupational time. And they were, the signs they would put up would basically say you're either with us or against us. And they were well known, and they were just trying to prevent too many. It was like the precursor of modern day guerrilla warfare. Of course, we've had guerrilla warfare for thousands of years, but basically this is the first of the real guerrilla warfare that wasn't just, they killed traitors. They did not target civilians, as did, say, the more famous Soviet partisans, or even we've heard so much about the French underground, but very little about the German underground resistance. Quite a fascinating article. And so the name of that issue, although of this particular September-October issue, was Werwölfe. I guess you speak German better than I do, but that is the plural of Werwolf. And so it's the picture of Hitler there, and is with the child, and in the background is the castle, the famous castle, in which many of these young people were trained in the arts of guerrilla warfare. And, it was a mysterious old castle. Of course, after the assassination in Aachen, they were kids all over the place were being stopped by the Germans, by the Allies, because they didn't know. They would stop kids that were 8, 9 years old. And listen, these are dangerous kids. It was Hulkrath Castle in the North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany, and that's where the recruits were trained in their underground warfare techniques. And according to historian Michael Fagnon, they were instilled with a fierce will to fight to the death. So, these were patriots, and of course, taking any type of you can talk all you want about how wonderful the French resistance were, and they were quite brutal too, and the fact that they targeted French, what they would thought were traitors amongst their people for collaborating with the Germans. Same thing with the German werewolf group. And of course, the German werewolves inspired modern day, werewolf operations, they would say, in Russia and other European nations who are irritated that mass numbers of immigrants are coming in. It's not something that we can support as a nonviolent organization, but just the fact of the matter is that they were inspired by the Hitler's werewolves, and these guys might tussle or beat up on Somali refugees who are marching or whatever in the middle of Russia or Berlin or wherever it may be, or in some other Eastern European nations. So they're well known outside of the United States, but the Hitler's werewolves were not extremely well known outside here in the United States. They're well known in Europe and a history a little bit more than we would know about it. But a fascinating story about their operations by Mark Rowland, who writes many stories for us, and that's our big lead story on this Werewolf of the Reich issue, which also includes all kinds, almost exclusively dedicated to World War II matters. It's a perfect issue for people to hand out that want to have a lot of bang, bang, bang articles on World War II from the Axis viewpoint, shall we say, at least not tainted by the political correctness we have that you must talk about World War II with. I'm sure you noticed some other articles in there and that you might want to talk about. Or you might want to make a comment yourself about this particular article.
Well, I know the Werewolf articles, there were two of them. There was a part one and a part two. What amazed me about them was just the effectiveness. Like you said, these were primarily kids who were defending their homeland as it was being invaded. What just amazed me was the efficiency with which a group of maybe, say, half a dozen teenagers could shut down an entire column of the Soviet army, or could basically turn around an entire division of the U.S. Army.
Absolutely. Other outfits have covered the werewolves, of course, from a different point of view. But Smithsonian had an article on them several years ago, I believe it was, and they called them terrorizing the Allied soldiers. Of course, here they are invading their homeland. They didn't necessarily slow down the Allied occupation, but they sowed fear, and they did jam up the works. I mean, there was nothing that was going to stop the Allies at this point in time. Germany was destroyed. But I mean, I was always thinking, listen, if at the end of wars, certain nations seem to get on with life. And look at the Japanese. The Japanese, they bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and boom, the war's over. Shortly thereafter, they turn around and they just move and go forward. The Germans did the same thing. And in some respects, you almost are scared of guerrilla warfare, because it may be years and years and years and years, and you may have to leave the country as far as if you're an invading force. Look at Iraq. That was a guerrilla war against us in Afghanistan, for gosh sakes. That has jammed up the works for ever and ever. So while we do have some admiration for the bravery of these people, I'm kind of glad that the movement failed in the respect that this could have gone on for a long time, and that sometimes it's just best to get on and move on. Look how Germany just rapidly advanced after the war. Had all of their population decided to engage in guerrilla operations, which is what the Werewolf wanted. And I think when Hitler first came up with it, I don't know if he thought this was going to go on for decades. I think he was just thinking this was going to slow down the Soviets for the most part and try to convince people that they shouldn't be traitoring, turning on their fellow German citizens, because obviously the denazification program was pretty brutal. But at any rate, yeah, it was amazing. I always say the most dangerous species in the planet. There's three of them, right? There's the human male, the human female, and human children. Sometimes you forget just how dangerous these children can be. But yeah, they did a good job of slowing this down. And in that respect, so many Germans were able to make their way back to Germany and get through past the Soviets, I suppose. And they probably end up saving many, many more lives than they possibly could have taken. So kudos to them, and kudos to Mark Rowland for writing the story up for us.
Before that article appeared, there was the editorial, and it was creating a fake reality. Did you write that editorial, or did somebody else?
No, I wrote that one. I mean, Ed, you know as well as I do what's going on, but go ahead and make your point.
I just thought that was very appropriate. That's what we're basically seeing here we've been seeing it for 50 years, but it's become patently obvious since Donald Trump rolled down the escalator.
Well, I must say that if people can't tell the difference now between real news and fake news, that they're never going to be able to, because never before in the history of this country, at least in my lifetime, which is just under 60 years, have we seen such obvious fiction being portrayed in the news media. But most importantly, or most pertinently recently, is the white supremacist shooters. And everybody's a white supremacist shooter, allegedly. And so we had multiple shootings recently, 22 killed here, 10 there, 12 there. I mean, we don't support this type of stuff, but it's just the portrayal of it. I mean, here was one of these alleged white supremacists. By the way, they group white nationalists in with white supremacists.
Well, it amazes me that on the same day there's another mass shooting, but the media ignores that one because the shooter was black.
Oh, absolutely. In this particular case, look at one of the shooters. I don't remember if it was Dayton or El Paso. I think it was Dayton, right? That the person that had the manifesto, whom they alleged he was a white supremacist neo-Nazi, yet he thought he wanted to vote for Elizabeth Warren and wanted Joe Biden to die. And he was like a total green guy, and he couldn't wait for socialism anymore. Okay, so it really is a fake reality. And your point being that during the time of these shootings, and there's another shooting recently, just the other day, right? And the guy's name was what? Aaron Esau Ator or something like that. Obviously not your average Christian name, but it's very convenient that he had white skin, and so all of a sudden he's a white guy. But that being said, you had the 6 cops that were shot in Philly trying to arrest the guy. They weren't killed, but you had 10 guys killed there and 5 guys killed there and 6 guys, all during this period of time, and they were all killed by black men, and nobody cared about that. You just had a recent shooting at the Alabama football game, right, in which 10 people were wounded by a black shooter, and that made the internet, but it certainly didn't make the nightly news. And of course, during this period of time, 45 were killed on this day or wounded and 6 killed in Chicago. And the next day it's 35 wounded and 8 killed. And the next day it's on and on and on and on. We do have some gun statistics there that are pretty interesting. I mean, you are more likely to be hit by lightning in the course of the year than be shot by some crazed neo-Nazi white supremacist, which I don't really even think there are that many around. Okay, it's kind of like KKK chapters. They like to portray them as infiltrating every single nook and cranny of every county in America when they're extremely limited numbers. But the real
and the ones that are there are run by the FBI, so
for the most part, yeah, that's right. But you look at the stats and you're like, we calculated this years ago in an article in American Free Press in which we had figured that more young black men had shot more young black men than had been killed in Vietnam. I mean, we're looking at now about 100 a day, of which 90% of black kids shooting black kids, generally turf wars over drug dealing, and then retribution killings, whatever. And there's also the poor innocent bystanders who are getting shot, the little children who are standing there, and the bullets are flying all over the place in Chicago and Kansas City, Detroit, right, and New York City's not too bad. But this is an historic low for crime, right? So we're talking currently we're about 100 people a day, but it's almost completely segregated to poor urban areas. Okay, and for the record, this report just recently came out that shows that more unarmed black men and more black men in general are being killed by black cops. Makes perfect sense, right? Black cops usually patrol the places where they grew up in, and they come across, they're patrolling heavily black areas where there's more crime. And so, of course, that statistic would work. But I thought that one of the things, and some of the extrapolation of this data is hypothetical in that we're working off percentages, but that in the course of a year, the number of white men who shoot themselves by a gun is quite a bit higher than the other suicides amongst other races. But I think the final result was that it's more chance that a white man is going to kill himself by a suicide with a gun than he's going to shoot somebody else. But if you turn on the news media, as everybody who's listening must certainly know by now, you're going to find that we are the most dangerous thing on this planet, that we're ready to kill dozens of people at a time, and we're all neo-Nazis, and we're all haters, and we're all anti-Semites, and whatever else. Yet it really, really doesn't hold water. As a matter of fact, if you want to go into the discussion of censorship and fake reality, the fake reality, of course, for news organizations that like American Free Press is that, of course, and the Barnes Review, is that recently YouTube's gone on another banning binge, right? And what did we hear about 3 weeks ago? That the Anti-Defamation League was going to be going after groups put out quote unquote fake news that Israel had foreknowledge of the 9/11 attacks. Well, listen, I mean, we don't really say one thing or another. We present the facts as they are and let you decide. But one of the most unpopular interviews that American Free Press had on YouTube was when we interviewed Scott DiCarlo. I believe we were the only news outlet in America to actually talk to the police officer who arrested the famous dancing Israelis. Okay, this was a really big story. As a matter of fact, Ryan Dawson did a great thing on it. I don't know him personally, but I picked on. I thought I knew something about it, but he knew all kinds of stuff. I encourage people to go listen to his analysis of this. At any rate, these Israelis that everybody knows, right, were on top of the trade buildings next to the Trade Center, filming and laughing and lighting lighters and filming the whole thing. And of course, they were held for almost a year, I believe, by the U.S. government, and then released mysteriously back to Israel, where one of them appeared on a radio show or a television show and admitted that they had been sent there to film the events. Well, I don't know how they knew how to set up where they were and where to point their cameras, but evidently they may have had some foreknowledge. Well, bingo, out of the blue, just before this anniversary of 9/11's coming up right on us here, the video that we did interviewing this cop, which was absolutely, if you listen to these guys talking about it, and especially Officer DiCarlo, he knows that he can get himself into trouble if he makes any type of conclusion. So he stuck straight to the facts. We found these guys. They were identified by people in the area, pointing them out. They thought they were Middle Easterners. We found out they were Israelis. Bob sniffing dog smelled a little bit of stuff on the truck. That day we arrested a few other, or neighboring jurisdictions arrested some other odd vans from this urban moving company, blah, blah, blah. There's not a hint of anti-Semitism in here. All there is a cop talking about how he arrested these guys on top of the Trade Center, and boom, that conspiracy theory quote, fake news, is gone off of YouTube. Now, you're trying to tell me that they haven't just increased the suspicion that these guys were there, or that they had some advanced foreknowledge? So obviously, just like with news, history, of course, is always being suppressed, and why it's so important that people read the Barnes Review and get it while you can, because like I always say, you never know. If we can't talk about a straightforward, like practically police report that this guy interviewed on the dancing Israelis, well, Lord knows you won't be able to talk about much of this stuff. Of course, what the Anti-Defamation League did was they put American Free Press and a bunch of other groups, including American Renaissance and James Alsop. I think his name is James Alsop. I mean, guys that are pretty controversial, but not really controversial in our way of thinking, because they're simply not politically correct. In today's world, they might be considered controversial only because they're not politically correct. And you know as well as I do that the big topics they want to talk about, and of course the Anti-Defamation League is a big moneymaker, the invention of anti-Semitism. That's how they do it. They want it around. They want you to think it's around. I never really met a Jewish person who ever said to me, man, I've been discriminated against my entire life. You know, this anti-Semitism is horrible, you know. So, but the thing is, you know this as well as I do. They don't like talking about the Holocaust at all. That is more sacred than any topic there is. You can say Jesus didn't exist and Muhammad didn't exist, and you can even say, I guess, Moses didn't part the Red Sea. But you can't say that 6 million Jews weren't gassed to death by Hitler. That's the line. Okay, say anything off of that line and you're crazy, you know, or you're going to be shut down. The other thing is you cannot, and you know this is part of the fake reality and all part of this white supremacy thing with the guns is, you can't say anything positive about white people nowadays. Otherwise, you're racist. So this whole leftist narrative is so fictional. It's so weird. It's got to fall apart because it doesn't make any sense. So much of it, as we're, you know, white people had killed 35 people before I wrote this article. It might be up to 50. And poor black people in bad neighborhoods are getting shot up by the thousands in this country. Who's the big threat to the community? Well, certainly in white supremacists, because there aren't that many. I'm not even sure I know what that is.
Well, just even with 3 mass shootings in Texas, the murder rate in Illinois is going to be astronomical compared to Texas.
Yeah, that's correct. And so it is a fake reality. So where's it going with this? How long is it going to last? Listen, I felt like the minute that we started talking about what bathroom men should use, you know, and what bathroom women should use, that we had lost it. The parallels between what happened in, you know, before Hitler took over in Germany, the corruption of the arts, film, the banking system, the bringing in immigrants or whatever it was, and then of course what happened earlier in Russia and the street demonstrations of the leftists and the useful idiots and the vilification of Christians and the Christian rulers, and now what's happening here with these street level fools running around begging for communism while you're looking over there for people who live under communism in Hong Kong, and they're like, "What are you doing? You want to swap places with me?" So, I don't know how deluded people much more they can get. It surprises me every day that I read something that's even more weird than was yesterday. But it is kind of scary here that the big topic of the day is censorship. And Google, I would say, which owns YouTube, which is, for those who don't know, right? YouTube is the biggest video sharing website in the world. This is where people go to see these great interviews. But they're disappearing by the tens of thousands, and people are getting their accounts taken down. And it's mostly from pressure from groups like the SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center. And if anybody trusts them after seeing their top echelon of leaders resign, right? And Morris Dees, the sexual harasser, right? He's been doing it for years. And then, of course, you got the Anti-Defamation League. And here's I could go on and on, but you got this guy Greenblatt, and I guarantee he's married to a Jewish gal because he's not going to mix. And they just blasted. And then, of course, excuse me, let me jump ahead. Media Matters for America, right, is owned by the homosexual guy David Brock, who's married to a white guy, as far as I know, right? And then we interviewed Joe Arpaio at American Free Press. This is turning into a free speech discussion. And he's this terrible racist, they tell us, yet he's got a black grandkid and an Hispanic grandkid. All right, so who's the racist here, right? Well, certainly ain't Arpaio. It's more the Greenblatts and the Brocks who are the racists. Of course, there's a great commentary we published in an interview with Joe Arpaio on American Free Press. But back to the topic of, otherwise I'll go on all day because it's so unbelievable how right-wingers or anybody with any type of alternative opinion about anything is being crushed by those preaching tolerance to us. They have absolutely no tolerance for differences of opinions or other things. I'm like, who really cares what we're saying? Well, evidently they care what we're saying because they're going well out of their way to try to pressure the biggest and richest internet and banking companies in the world simply to shut us down and other groups that have limited outreach to begin with because they're not rolling in dough like these places. It's insane. But anyway, back to the point about the Barnes Review this is why people should really try to read it while they can and support it while they can, because it's a magazine that is trying its very best on a shoestring budget to put out the highest quality material on topics that are absolutely taboo. And if you don't think that some of these topics are going to be criminalized, a discussion of them, you're probably wrong. Look, I should let you get a word in edgewise once in a while, but I'm fired up today. This whole thing about the U.S. military now getting involved in policing the internet for fake news and conspiracy theories because they might be a quote-unquote security threat is probably even more scary. I have always said that print publications can survive better than can internet because our partnership with the U.S. Post Office via second-class permits allows us to mail at a discount. But it also makes the U.S. government our partner in distributing any information we send via the mail. But putting the military into the equation might mean that they would be able to skirt the Second Amendment protections of the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment protection of the Bill of Rights, by getting the military to go in there and call something a national security threat. Okay, you don't have to violate, pass a law that violates freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. You just have the military go in and shut the place down because they say conspiracy theories, I think, more or less, they were scared about what the QAnon thing was going on. They alleged that these conspiracy theories might inspire violence. But once again, they're few and far between. And when you look at the end of the year of 36,000 Americans being shot in the inner cities in this country, anywhere from 34,000 to 36,000, and 40 or 50 or 60 being killed by some wacko, okay, where's the real threat here? And where are all these guns? You want to confiscate guns? Don't confiscate guns from as Kamala Harris said, right? She wants to, if she becomes president, she wants to confiscate guns from these dangerous white nationals to prevent terror attacks before they happen. So here's like she's predicting the future and doing these preemptive strikes. Well, right there, in around the country, and she's from Los Angeles, I believe, or at least California, in her own districts or her own state at the very least, thousands of people are dying. Thousands of people are dying from the drug trade and from illegal handguns. So if you want to confiscate, man, start confiscating in Detroit, in Milwaukee, Kansas City, and St. Louis, and Houston even. And if you look at the list of cities, it's pretty scary. Some of them are the ones you might not even expect the numbers. Like Nashville has gotten bad. In certain places in Alabama and Mississippi, Florida. But again, we're at an historic low in gun shootings. Imagine what this was in the 70s, and they didn't do a daggone thing about it. And really what they ought to do is probably send in the National Guard to the inner cities and set up big lights and put a couple troops on the corner to stop the slaughter. Anyway, we're the last people you got to worry about here. We're number one on their list. Crazy stuff, right?
If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you can subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. I don't know. One of the reasons we haven't been reporting about these shootings in Dixie Heritage, well, not only because the mainstream news sources are talking about them ad nauseum, but to be quite honest, I don't even consider them news.
These shootings that happen at like garlic festivals, and they scare people. And so white people aren't necessarily scared by what's happening in the inner cities, but they can be certainly scared by what they see as like family gatherings. So I get why the news media is doing that. It's a scare tactic. As long as most of these people are removed completely from what's happening in the inner cities, then they'll never really know what the story is. But yeah, listen, fear is a great thing. And you keep hammering this stuff home, people start to believe they can't set foot outside their door without some wacko shooting them with a assault rifle. Okay, right. We know that's just such baloney. But the number of people who are buying into this is kind of scary. So even though you may not be covering it, you might want to rethink that, only to set the record straight, because there's so few organizations trying to set the record straight. But yeah, I mean, you're right about one thing. People should be ignoring the mainstream news media, because it's become just a fake reality, fictional distributor of bogus material. It's absolutely unbelievable.
One of the articles that I thought had a lot of potential in this issue, unfortunately, I don't feel that it dealt with the subject to the depth that it should have. Dr. Johnson wrote an article, Hitler on Christianity, in his own words. And I wish he would have quoted Hitler more than he did. I think there was too much commentary and not enough actual quoting of Hitler on the subject. Of course, you read Mein Kampf, and Hitler discusses the Bible a lot in Mein Kampf. And so there was a lot of quotes from Adolf Hitler on Christianity. And I wish, like I said, we would have saw more of them in the article than we did. But I still thought it was an interesting subject, kind of to see. Of course, Hitler was a Roman Catholic, but people think of him as being anti-religious when really he was not.
Well, he recognized the importance of Christianity as a unifying force amongst his people. I'm not going to get into that particular article because it was lengthy and lengthier. We're going to be posting the longer version of it online. But people were a heck of a lot more religious back then. And Hitler understood Christianity, understood its purpose. He understood the good aspects of it. But I think that if you read that you'll get enough of a flavor. Remember, one of the things is a lot of he is not a big believer in the table talks being legitimate, and so a lot of people will grab. I don't know if Hitler talked about that or not, but a lot of people will grab most of their quotes from table talk, and whether or not that's actual discussions or of Hitler taken verbatim, or they've been edited heavily. What he did quote from were from his actual speeches, which you could verify every single word in them. I mean, basically, Hitler saw Christ as a warrior for justice. So, I mean, he was, in some ways, saw his battle the same as Christ's battle, and to reform what he saw were the corrupting influences or degraded influence of Judaism upon the people. But he was not an atheistic pagan. He was a religious, I wouldn't say a totally religious person, because he didn't really set his foot in church too much, from what I understand.
Well, but Hitler also had an interesting paradigm in Germany where, half the country was Lutheran and half the country was Catholic. He didn't want to be seen as favoring one side, because then automatically he would be seen as the enemy of the other.
Well, let me put it this way. So who's more tolerant of religion, today's Germany or Hitler's Germany? Well, if Jesus was running around the streets of Germany today, he would be thrown in prison for inciting ethnic hatred. That's all I can tell you. I suggest people get that issue. It's only $10 or $11 plus shipping. 140 pages is like a 280-page book, and read that article for themselves. It's not one of my expertises. If nothing about Hitler happens to be. But you know more about religion than I do. I'll take your opinion on that particular article. But I was pretty happy with it because I learned something from it. And every article that I learned something from, I end up saying was a pretty good one.
Extra, read all about it.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. You like to hear about the latest financial trends and to know what's happening around the world and right here in the United States, the things that can directly impact you, your life, and the life of your family. And if you're like me, you do not rely on the mainstream media to obtain this information because, frankly, you know that you just can't trust them. Fortunately, there is an alternative news outlet with a long-established track record for honesty and integrity, and that is the American Free Press. AFP is the preeminent alternative, independent news source for honest, hard-working, truth-loving Americans. AFP is the antithesis of the controlled, lamestream media. AFP is employee-owned and has been so since its founding. Because of that, AFP never has and never will allow advertisers or special interests or big money to dictate what appears in the pages of the American Free Press newspaper. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. AFP covers the stories and tells the truth that the lamestream media is frankly scared to touch. And AFP offers real, on-the-scene reporting and commentary, the likes of which you will never see in the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or just about any other lamestream news source that you can think of. That's right, there's only one national populist news weekly staffed by an unsurpassed team of veteran investigative journalists who will dare to rip the veil off of many of the major news stories that are being censored and suppressed by the big money controlled media monopoly. And that's the American Free Press. AFP publishes exciting, in-depth, uncensored news and information that's grassroots and patriotic, information that Americans need to know in order to combat the growing police state. AFP stands firmly against the New World Order and against those who are working to establish a global plantation under the rule of a powerful few. In short, AFP is your voice. If you have any doubt why they want to silence AFP, you must be relying on the lamestream media for your news, and folks, that's a big mistake. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, extra, read all about it.
Hitler and Christianity is not as exciting to a lot of people as Hitler speaking about the Jews. Now, we all hear about this over and over again, about what an anti-Semite he was and what he said. Now, listen, he was. But I thought that the book review coming up after the article in Christianity was a fascinating thing, in that no one's really ever taken every single thing that Hitler ever said about Jewish citizenry and put them into one book. Now, the review is by David Skrbina, PhD, but the book's by Tom Dalton, and TBR readers know Tom Dalton as a guy who boils things down and makes things understandable, like Introduction to the Holocaust, Debating the Holocaust, and other books. I believe I can't remember what his other books are, but he's written this book called Hitler and the Jews, and it's been very popular because you'll see exactly what he said. So there he is. In one issue, we've got Hitler on Christianity and Hitler on Judaism, what he actually thought about both. And I don't know how many organizations you're going to pick up an average issue and find either one of those gutsy enough to talk about those particular issues. You also have Adolf Hitler's Views on the United States by Pat Shannon, who it really was a long piece by Hitler put together. But
Pat kind of took some quotes from the Table Talks and put them together into an article, if you will.
Yes, that's correct. So he is a believer that the Table Talks are legit, and the Table Talks are an interesting discussion all on their own. But in it, you'll find that's one of the articles in this particular Werewolves of the Reich article. Issue, the massive issue. I think
one thing you point out too, in around page 39, maybe. In Adolf Hitler's Views on America, it's pointed out that the Americans were attacking German naval vessels long before there was a declaration of war.
Nobody really thinks about that or realizes that we were basically in a state of war and had already chosen sides by then.
Yeah.
The idea that we were neutral was ridiculous. In fact, I think when the time finally came, when Germany allegedly declared war on America, it was almost so reluctantly. And if you read the declaration of war, he does go into it. He says the President of the United States publicly declared that he had ordered the American Navy and Air Force to shoot on sight at any German war vessels. This was September 11, 1941.
Right. This was even before Pearl Harbor, way before Pearl Harbor.
Right. And this was the speech of October 27, 1941. But he was talking about September 11, interesting date, and that he had ordered the American Navy and Air Force to shoot on sight. The vessels of the American Navy, since September 41, had systematically attacked German naval vessels. American destroyers, and he lists them, the Greer, the Kearney, and the Reuben James, opened fire on German subs. According to the plan, the Secretary of the Navy, Mr. Knox, confirmed that American destroyers attacked German submarines. Furthermore, the naval forces of the United States, under order of their government, contrary to international law, have treated and seized German merchant vessels. This was happening consistently. And so they had almost no recourse, but to respond here is kind of like why Hitler invaded Poland, I always say, right? I mean, it wasn't like he's decided, hey, let's go take over Poland. He's like, man, my people are being slaughtered in Poland to the tune of 55, 56, 60,000 people in 1939 alone. I can't sit by and do nothing.
Say the Russians were taking Poland at that time, so.
Right, and Germany had strictly adhered to the rules of international law in her relations with the United States during every period. But the United States had broken this neutrality again and again, and basically were engaging in open acts of war against Germany. The German government, inevitably discontinued its diplomatic relations with the United States and declared that these circumstances had been, forced on them by Roosevelt. We consider ourselves being in a state of war, is what they said. They didn't even really say, like, we declare war on you. Like, You've been blowing up our ships, attacking our submarines, confiscating our merchant vehicles. We're sorry, but nothing we can do. We're going to have to declare ourselves at war with you. But anyway, Hitler's views of the United States were interesting. I had a professor once who always used to quote to me and say, Hitler was right about the United States, right? It's going to chew itself up from within. It's going to devour itself and break apart. It's not working. It's not what's going to work for your country. You've allowed too many people that aren't ready to assimilate to be Americans, and your melting pot is going to boil over one day and burn up. And looking at it today, you'd have to ask yourself whether or not the guy had a crystal ball, because although I must say that I do believe we can all live together peacefully in this country, we still have an amazingly low crime rate. We still have even the poverty-stricken people in this country still have TVs and cable and cars and food to eat. Matter of fact, they're obese like crazy, right?
Well,
So they're
Mark
getting enough to
Levin
eat.
has been pointing this out on his radio show for probably about the last week now. The poorest people in the United States have a higher standard of living than the middle-class people in 63 other developed nations.
Most of that is due to our welfare programs.
Exactly,
So
yes, that's correct.
For all intents and purposes, as far as the poor in this country, the United States is a socialist state. As a matter of fact, I saw a stat just yesterday that said if you took the 20%, the poorest people in America, the 20%, they'd have a better, higher gross domestic product than like 40 or 50 nations, like you're saying. That being said, I wouldn't underestimate the struggles of the poor in this country, because we know that the struggles of the middle class, our own, I'm sure, right, are hard enough to be able to gather enough money together to pay our mortgage and food and electrical bill and a car payment. But I've always felt very fortunate, and I still say we still live, even with the freedom of speech disappearing rapidly, we still live in one of the greatest nations in the history of this planet. That being said, they can ruin it pretty quick. And a lot has happened here since Barack Obama took over as president. I always feel like they must have had a little meeting. Well, this is what we want the United States to look like. And we're going to do everything in our power, right? And they're going to go, well, nobody's going to buy that. Well, that's okay. Just create the fake reality in the news media that everything's fine except for these white people. They're the huge problem here, right? And then as soon as we get them under control, then we can proceed forward with a massively multicultural society, the likes of which the world has never seen, and with a few places where it has been seen, it's fallen apart.
The North Carolina Heritage Political Action Committee was organized by concerned citizens of North Carolina in 2015 in response to the increased attacks on North Carolina's history and heritage. The North Carolina Heritage PAC supports state and local candidates for public office who pledge and show their support for the protection of Confederate memorials and the preservation of all of North Carolina's history. We all know that Confederate memorials and symbols are the easy targets, and that the end game of our leftist enemies is to erase and rewrite all of history, from the colonies to the War on Terror. If we fight them for our state's rich Confederate history and heritage, we may be able to stop them from their mission of total destruction. Join the North Carolina Heritage PAC now by visiting ncheritagepac.org. Once again, that is www.ncheritagepac.org. And help us on the front lines of North Carolina politics. The mission statement of North Carolina Heritage PAC is that the North Carolina Heritage PAC was created with the purpose of supporting diverse efforts to defend and preserve the heritage, traditions, monuments, cemeteries, flags, emblems, and other legacies of North Carolina history against those efforts to remove, deface, legislate against, alter, and otherwise corrupt or pervert their meaning, history, presentation, and standing in our state. Once again, www.ncheritagepac.org.
So at any rate,
Well, the thing that I find scary is that, we thought that the world as we knew it was going to come to an end, if you will, under Barack Obama, and that did not happen. But now, here just in the last few weeks, we've seen the Second Amendment start to literally unravel before our eyes. And of course, as the Second Amendment goes, so will the other 9. And so wouldn't that be funny if we managed to maintain America through Barack Obama and we lose it under Donald Trump?
You know, I remember when I worked for the Spotlight, they had 300,000 subscribers at one point in time, maybe 350, maybe 375, which made it a powerful force. And then that was the Jimmy Carter era, right? And all of a sudden Reagan got elected and everybody thought everything was going to be fine. And the same thing kind of happened here in that Trump got elected. I guess maybe people got a little bit complacent. But the left certainly didn't get complacent. Now, listen, I think there's a lot more people out there who support guys like Trump. I won't say particularly Trump because I still believe there's a perfect candidate out there somewhere. You can't find him. But that there have come to a new level of fear from what the left is doing. This doxing, losing your job. You can't even attend a rally. And if there happens to be a Confederate flag in the background, you're going to lose your job, even if you're just there taking photographs. And so I think a lot of people are going to end up, they're hiding how they really feel. That they're not comfortable anymore in this country saying out loud what's really on their mind. And thus, they're going to go to the polling booth and maybe pull that lever. Anybody who's pulling a lever now for the Democrats, and I hate to talk about Democrats and Republicans because they're not really all that much different about some things, but the divisions were being pushed to the edges, as I always say. The radical left and the radical right are actually, people are listening to them. So I'm not exactly sure how many Democrats really support this. I just know the Democrats themselves are scared to stand up to the likes of Ilhan Omar and Tlaib and Presley and there's another big one out there. But anyway, Kamala Harris, of course. But if we turn this country over them, you can forget it. And you think it's bad now. So, but it's pretty bad, I'll tell you, about as far as freedom of speech goes. But I do believe people are more concerned than they're letting on, and they might just pull that lever for anybody but the left. You know, even dyed-in-the-wool Democrats I know who will just pull that lever to vote for every single Democrat. It doesn't matter who, are stopping to think. Several of my friends who have been voting Democrat forever, and believe me, I was one who would vote for whoever I thought was the best candidate. I would consider myself an independent. But they watched those Democratic debates, and what they took away from those debates was that the Democrats were more concerned about illegal immigrants than American citizens. And they were just more focused on Trump than they were on problem solving or issues. And if that's all they got, they're going to be in trouble. So it's either going to be the end of the Republican Party or the beginning of some new Republican Party. I have a feeling the Democratic Party is probably going to split because there's a lot of Democrats and a lot of Republicans, by the way, who are more centrist than they're letting on. We are traditionally centrist in this country, I think. But unfortunately, like I said, the radical elements of the parties are driving a lot of the debate and the discussion. Although I'll tell you, you're a Christian pastor, and so for you, the moral decay in this country must be disturbing.
You're probably making the point there and not even realizing it, because John Adams, I believe it was, made the statement that the Constitution was written to govern a Christian people and it would be sufficient for none other. And so as we're seeing the moral decay of the country and we're seeing the abandonment of Christianity in the country, we're seeing that Adams was correct, and we're wondering why the Constitution doesn't seem to work these days. It's not that the Constitution isn't working, it's that the people it's governing have fundamentally changed.
That's a fascinating analysis and probably 100% correct. And, of course, they know this. They have to know this. Those behind the push to brand those who resist the influx of mass numbers of non-Christians and non-whites too, non-Europeans. And I say that only because those are the people we have the most cultural affinity for, the people that live by the same rules we have for thousands of years, the same people that worship the same monuments and have shared so much culture in common. You cannot mix oil and water. And that's what they're trying to do. And they just and the only way to mix oil and water is to stir it up, just to constantly stir it and stir it and stir it. And that's what they're doing now, and it still separates in the end. By all peoples who feel more comfortable. Look, the Muslims who go up into Minnesota will say they don't want to live with Christians. They want their own enclaves. And so then they should probably go and have, as the Dalai Lama said, right? Europe is for Europeans. These people can come here and they can find refuge for a short amount of time. They can receive education, but they need to go home and make their places better with people that they have a cultural affinity for. But I'm telling you that that's not the plan that they came up with, and I swear it was adopted at the time Obama was president. Now, there had to have been, if there was one big meeting, I have no idea, but there had to have been some involvement with the mainstream news media in this country that here's the narrative we want you to push. No matter what the facts are, really doesn't matter, because we can convince people that this is what's happening. So over and over again, you ignore the crime that's happening in the inner cities. You ignore the, oh my gosh, if you see the illegal immigration crimes, the crimes being committed by the illegal immigrants and people in the border areas, it's outlandish. The number of rapes. Look at I used to live in Montgomery County, Maryland, and Montgomery County was a very nice county, and I saw that it was like a news item about yet another illegal immigrant who had already been convicted of traffic violations. But anyway, that point was there was another rape, yet another rape, and another rape, and another rape. And you're like, oh my gosh, how long are they going to put up with this? It's a massive influx. In my own county here in Virginia, we just had like a notification from the school system that they're going to have to radically increase. And this was a 95% rural, white county. We get along quite well with everybody here because we don't have that the racism that's endemic in, say, the Anti-Defamation League and Media Matters for America, which we discussed in an editorial recently. But we're going to have to increase our support in the school system for non-English speakers. Non-English speakers. This is a high school. Are you telling me how many kids are going to come into this high school and can't speak English at all? How are you going to teach them? You're going to have to completely change everything that you're doing. You're going to have people teach them English. Well, if you got to teach them English, what else don't they know how to do? Meaning, do they know how to live in a society like this? Are they from a lawless one? Do they know laws about the importance of this? In a book I was reading, is a famous book by a Jewish guy named Guns, Germs, and Steel, right? His point was always, well, it really doesn't matter what your race is. It's where you were located geographically. If you were stuck in the middle of the Sahara Desert, well, you're never going to be able to build a massive city. We'll get out the Sahara and go ahead and build it on the coast. But whatever. He had some good points, and he had some points that were pretty bad. But at the end of the article, at the end of the book, he tried to explain the anomalies then. For instance, he came up with North and South Korea. I don't know if you and I have discussed this before, but he came out with North and South Korea, and he came up with Haiti and the Dominican Republic on the island of Hispaniola. And he couldn't really explain why Haiti was a complete failure and the Dominican Republic wasn't. Well, we know what happened in Haiti, right? It was a slave rebellion that killed not only every single white person they can get their hands on, every government official, every road builder, every architect, every doctor, every mother, every child, every farmer, everybody who could teach them how to do something, and they killed every mulatto as well. Those that they didn't kill luckily escaped across the border to the Dominican Republic. And Haiti has done nothing since then. Well, he said this more than just racial, of course, and my point will come around now, is that these people have not lived in a civilization long enough to know how to behave. And so you look at people coming from crazy places in Africa, and you see the pictures of them squatting down in the middle of New York City and going to the bathroom. Well, that's the way they do it at home. It's not the way we do it here. Or the way they treat women in other countries besides Western nations, how they behave in religious festivals and such like that. It's not necessarily how we do it here. And so will they ever integrate? Is that the point? Is not to integrate? Is they just going to keep stirring the thing to get the oil and the water to mix? So we'll find out sooner or later, but it doesn't look like it's going too well in the right direction.
And we are out of time for this week's TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, so I am going to pull the interview with Paul Angel. Going to stop it right here. But don't worry, we'll have Paul back again next week. We didn't even get to half of the content of the magazine. I know Paul and I got sidetracked a little bit talking about some current events. But that's okay. We'll just bring Paul back next week and we'll finish the discussion and we'll make it through to the back pages of the magazine next week. So you'll want to stay tuned and tune in again next week for TBR Radio Presents so that you can hear the conclusion of this discussion over the September-October issue, the 25th anniversary issue of the Barnes Review magazine. As always, I'd like to encourage you to go to my website, www.dixieheritage.net. And when you go there, you can sign up for a free copy of my weekly newsletter. When you do that, I'll also send you absolutely free a copy of my book, The Truth About the Confederate Battle Flag. And so from all of us here at TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, until next week, God bless.